let's get to it. The 8 puzzles. Yeah, so the first one, white to move and win. You're welcome to put in the answers in the chat. So should the white king go to f3 or f2? So that's the question. We cannot allow the black king to run out. Yeah. I got a couple of correct ones. I have to play king h1, then what? If h2, then you mate me on g3, so I go back here. And now it's made in 4 moves. How? So we just started out with this puzzle. We started out with king f3 on move 1. And then we got to this position. And now it's a mate in 4 move. So if knight d4, then what? Yeah, that's right. So f5. You have to keep an eye on g3. So if I try to stalemate myself, you should always be ready to. And then king has to go back. And then we aim for the f1 square, which forces the pawn to move. And we can checkmate. So that is one way to do it. Yeah, I like to go knight e4, d2. That's just my preferred choice. But it's all the same, really. There are 2 ways to get to f1 here. So, yeah, that's it. So, forced mate. Let's move on to the next puzzle. So there are also several ways to do this. So whatever way you chose, it's okay with me. Yes, Matt, that also works. Knight c3, knight e4, knight d2, knight f1 from the previous puzzle. So what about this one now? So if king d3, king a1, then we cannot stalemate the black king. And it's difficult. We need to release our knight. Then the pawn on a2 is hanging. So what do we do? Yeah, so the idea is we don't mind black king takes the pawn. So knight e4 is one idea. I'll probably try to defend with king b2 just to keep it going. Because if I take this pawn, I'm probably planning to do a mirrored version of the checkmate we just saw. And then this time to c1. Okay. So there are many ways to do this. You can play knight e4. And then the best defense is king b2. And now we have to force the black king to take the pawn. That is our biggest task. So now we've seen this made so many times. So if black takes the pawn, you're not going to have such a hard time. So now you have to find a way to force black to take that pawn. And then you have to make sure the knight is within reach to do the checkmate afterwards, before black stalemates himself. So that's basically the task. So Yeah, so in this position, there's this idea of playing king c3, simply because we also have a target here. So that kind of forces you to take. Otherwise, I'd play king b3. And now we are back to what we know. So the idea of the king going to b3 is probably the most efficient way to force black to take that pawn. Knight b5 is also a way, because now the knight is hitting that pawn. That also forces the capture. Or king b3 again, and then we have the same situation. Yeah, so there are many ways to do this. Okay. So the a2 pawn can be sacrificed. That's the main idea. Okay, so for this one, and we have king d5. That was the puzzle. It was black to move first instead of white. So how do we do now in this one? Did anyone solve this one? Now we have to be a little more creative. So last time we could just jump on the other side with a knight. b4, knight c5, knight a6. But this time, more complicated. Well, let's see. It's white to move here after king d5. So, yeah, so we looked at b4 and then this idea in the presentation. And now we're giving black the first move. And then white still can find a solution. But how? Yeah, so I got one suggestion. Matt, in your line after b4, can I go for that b4 pawn instead of the knight on c1? So let's see, king g7, king d4, knight c1, that's the right idea, by the way. And now you go king f6, king d2, then you go b4. Could I go for that pawn now? You're right, if I take the knight, then king e5 seems to... Does it win? Or can I go to a4? Oh, you go to c6, then a... Yeah, this is not great. This is actually good for black. But what about... Yeah, okay. So black can do that. So what then? Knight c1 is the right idea. Let's see, b4 here. Then we had king d2. And this was the line we had before. No, there's a difference. It was not played king f6 here. But you're not in time to get the knight on the other side. Yeah, this looks like it's okay for black. So here's the idea. We play knight b3. We're actually trying to get the knight on the other side, but with the reversed move order. So if you play this, then I play knight a5. Now I'm ready to play b4. And if king c2, then b4. And now we have the knight c6 option, talking about having two options. So that works. And if black goes b4, then we're still on the other side, just with the pawns on b3, b4 instead. So the key here was to play knight b3. But first, knight c1 is very intuitive. That's what we want to play, because we keep the black king out. But it's not only defensive thinking, we are actually thinking about jumping on the other side and then b pawn forward. So, yeah. So we gave black the move at the beginning, and white still found a solution, but had to be a little more creative. With our first move, it was kind of easy. So, and if black moved first, then suddenly we had to dig a little bit deeper to find a couple of ideas to combine them. So, yeah, knight b3 was a tough move. Okay, let's move on. So, what to do here? Let's see. Yeah, so we had this with an A pawn, and the problem is it's going to promote on A1, protecting that corner square. So it's a tricky study because we cannot let the moment go where we. So the main difference is the king is on f7, not here. If the king was on h7, we could choose freely. But now the king can only go to g8. And we can use this to gain this tempo. So first we get the knight to d3, or we get the knight around. And now black is actually in a little bit of, because if he goes to g8, then we go to g6. And this position with king g8, king g6, so it's about winning a tempo. If we play king f5 here, we have the same position, king g8, king g6, but now the knight is here and not here. So it is about losing a tempo and get to the right position. But it's all because the black king is on f7. It lacks the flexibility to choose squares from f7 that it would have on h7. So let's say we move the knight around first. Now we are waiting for the black king to move. And then let's say if king f8, we go king f6. And then king g6. So, and now we can go back. And now suddenly black finds himself in a situation where he has to stay on g8. And this is not what he wanted, because now we have the check that forces the king to the corner. And it's going to be checkmate. So it's tricky. So we just had to time it right. So, so if you have these positions, it is better to just stand in front of the pawn, because then you have more options to choose here. So, and in this position, white can actually use this lack of flexibility from black to move the knight around first and then win the crucial tempo. So that's the idea. So I guess the knowledge from the positions before was that under normal circumstances, if we let black choose, then an A pawn like this is not losing for black. But so we have to make sure we cannot let black choose. Yeah. So it really depends on where the knight is, I guess. King f5 is wrong because here we have to go to g6. We don't have a choice. If we go to f6, then black can force us back, and then black suddenly has the choice and can make the right choice. So the moment he goes to g8, we have to go to g6. So we lost it when we played king f5. So we have to play knight a2, and then suddenly we have a choice. Okay. It's tricky how this tempo disappeared there. But you have to be creative with the tempos in these positions with a knight. So it is like that. So that's one reason why we consider it so much. So what about this one? There's actually a couple of solutions to this one. I guess two ways of doing this. So I have, there's both knight b3 and knight e2. So tell me which one of those you chose. Knight e2 is nice because it attacks a pawn and thus somehow makes it more forcing. Pawn has to move, and then we go for the attack of the e4 pawn. And we also have the knight check on d5. So it's kind of, and here we have all the winning moves in the world, knight back and forth, and then we just bring the pawn forward. So knight e2 is forcing black's hand, and then it's maybe easier to calculate for white. But knight b3 is also winning, simply because now we control both pawns. And if f3, we kind of attack both pawns. So, and now we control the pawns again. So, okay, I don't think this was too much of a problem. Yeah. That's a good question. I guess so. So the question is, what if, let's say, we get to this position here, and this pawn was on a6, let's say, and we had the king here, just like before. So I guess the knight would come in, just like we did. I don't think it matters if there's a pawn on e4, because black is going to promote. So I guess so. It would be winning no matter what. I guess even if we had an a pawn, yeah. So how does the mate work since the king is on the promotion square diagonal? Oh, no, sorry. I meant to put the pawn here on a6 and then the king supposed on so this is the place for the kings, b8 and b6. Yeah. So I just wanted to switch that pawn from b6 to a6. And then we have the king here on the yellow squares. So it's basically a mirror image of what we saw earlier with the c pawn. Okay. So this is fairly simple. Here we simply use all the waiting moves we have with the knight. So the knight is pretty good at waiting moves when it comes to this. Okay, let's move on. So this one is, yeah, did you solve this one? It's actually easier than you might think. So this is actually a position of mutual Zugzwang, or it's white to move, but if black were to move here, black would be in trouble. So we can simply make a triangulation, because black can only stay here, because he cannot go too far away from the pawn. So the main line goes like this, and then we're back to to the position. And then the king moves. And then the best black can do here is to play b4. And if white takes that pawn, then it's a draw. Because you cannot defend your pawn, but you should simply go ahead and promote to a queen. So this position was about a king triangulation. Yeah, white could also argue, let me see. Yeah, I cannot go to g6, so the triangulation is here, sorry. Because if I start to move, let's say, to g6, then the pawn is just running down. And there's no way stopping it. So the two squares black had to go to was f6, f7. So that's why we just make a triangulation. Okay, let's move on. This one was if we gave black the first move. And this is the only time we see a barrier today. Did anyone find the win in this one? What's the idea to win here? Now it's not so easy to get the knight around on the other side of the pawn because black got the first move. So now we have to find a different solution. I should also say, while you're thinking about this, there is a lot of knight versus pawn where it all comes down to a race, and you cannot just switch the move, and consider what happens if the move disappears. Sometimes it's just a race and about being first. So of course there's a lot of positions like that. I have a lot of those in sharp endgames. So we are just trying to figure out how the knight can solve some of these problems that arises with waiting moves. So there's a lot of positions where it's a question of time. So the solution here is to walk the king towards the g3 pawn. And now it turns out that this knight is creating a barrier. Let's say something like this. Let's say black is trying to get back here. And let's say king f4. And now we see the barrier in full action. That's why I called it a wall earlier, because a barrier means that you have the squares you control directly that I put in green. And then you have all the squares you control indirectly here because of a knight fork, picks up the pawn, same for here. So there's no way the black king is getting closer to its own pawn. So this is just winning for white. Okay, so the solution was simply to take the pawn on g3, go there with the king, and the knight can take care of the queen side. Okay. You can just let me know if there were any questions. Otherwise, I will go for the last one. That is probably the most tricky. This is a study by Braun, and it actually starts at this point. And here again, move order moves matter. So king f7 and then king f8. And now black is in Zugzwang and must go back to g8. And now we kind of trap black in the corner there. He has to play h6. Yeah, knight h6 is a nice little stalemate trap, but it actually ends up in checkmate next move. There's knight f7 checkmate. So black has to go h6. And we get to this position. And here I just put in this move and then king g6. And this is the start of the puzzle. How does white get this position with black to move? And let me hear if any one of you solved it, because you have to use quite a bit of logic here. Well, at least that's how I solved it the first time I saw it. So let's see. In order to lose that tempo, we need to do a king triangulation. But if we start to move the king away, then we have to make sure that the king cannot run out of the corner. So we need to control this square. Yeah, then the knight can jump to f6, right? Yeah. So we need to make sure when our king runs away to make a triangulation, then we have to control g7. But we also have to control f6, so the knight cannot jump out. So that means we want to get our knight to e8. So let's try that. Black can only go back and forth. Okay, so where can we do the triangulation now? Now this knight is controlling black completely. The knight cannot get out. Well, you have to control this square with the white king, otherwise the knight jumps out. But otherwise the knight is taken care of. So we need to control this square to make sure the knight doesn't jump out. So what about we make a triangulation on these three squares? So let's see. Now we lost the tempo. And now we can start to get the knight back. And black is in Zugzwang. So that's a very nice idea and a little bit imaginative king triangulation taken to the extreme a little bit, but I wanted to give you this puzzle at the end. This is Bron, but you will get it in the database I send out afterwards. So you will get the puzzle. Yeah, but it's a very nice idea of this triangulation around the E7 square. So that's the only triangle you can find around here without going too far away. So, and that works. So, yeah. Well, that's it for today. Let me know if you have any final questions. Yeah, you're welcome. And I will send out the database afterwards. And I will see you. I will see you next week. What do you mean by D5? Putting the knight on E4. Then you don't control E7. No, the point is then you don't control G7. How are you going to make a triangulation then? Then the king has to, but you cannot make a triangulation around G7. That's a problem. Okay. So, yeah, you're welcome. See you next week, everyone. Thank you.